So good morning, everyone. So as Reverend Bonnie said, the theme for this month is giving God a good time. And I did notice that when Reverend Bonnie was up here and she was talking about this, she seemed to be a little hesitant about the idea of having fun as part of a good time. And one of my mottos has always been, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. So I have no problem with fun at all. And she also seemed ambivalent when talking about this notion of hedonism. She looked that up. And hedonism is an ancient Greek philosophy about pleasure. And it's always struck me as kind of amazing that they could have this philosophy thousands of years ago before the discovery of the New World, because tomatoes and potatoes came from the New World, so they didn't have pizza. They didn't have marinara sauce. They didn't have French fries, home fries. They didn't have coffee. This philosophy of having a pleasure, and what amazing, they did not have chocolate. And Randy Granger, if he were up here, would also point out they didn't have green chilies. So I had to throw that in for him. So hedonism, somehow they were still able to find pleasure in their lives even without those things. And maybe it was using Ray Kleitz's keys to happiness, which are gratitude and service. And so we'll talk about that a bit, too. So if you'll all open up your Bibles to the book of Deuteronomy. Or maybe I'll just open mine up. I picked the big one up for... Oh, let me put this here. So let me set the scene first. The book of Deuteronomy, there's actually a bit of an irony in that whole book. Because if you go back to the beginning of the book of Exodus, when Moses is trying to get out of the job of leading the Israelites out of Egypt, he says, I have a heavy tongue. I'm not a man of words. And the book of Deuteronomy opens up. These are the words that Moses spoke to the Israelites, and then goes on for like 30 some odd chapters. So he becomes a man of words somewhere along the line, apparently. And this takes place, this speech is just before the Israelites are about to go into the promised land. And so Moses is going to be referencing the idea of this temple that will be in Jerusalem, but it's centuries in the future. And so he's going to use a circumlocution. He's going to say something like the place where God will arrange for his name to have a home or some such. So we're going to go into chapter 14. And chapter 14 starts with all these rules of eating, rules of what you can eat and what you can't eat. And nothing about vegan, nothing about gluten-free, more about cloven hooves and scales on fish and things like that. But eventually get to verse 22. And actually, let me pause a bit and go a little further back. In prior chapters and in prior books, there's this commandment to whenever when they would count their sheep, they would use a counting rod. They would 1, 2, 3, and the commandment was every 10th one under the rod you put aside, and every 10th bushel of wheat that you have you put aside, and every 10th jar of oil and so on you put aside. And now finally in chapter 14 of Deuteronomy, it says what to do with those. So every year, you must take a tithe of all that your sowing yields on the land, and in the presence of Yahweh your God, in the place he chooses to give his name a home, the temple, you are to eat the tithe of your corn, your wine, and your oil, and your herd and flock. So what do you do with this tithe? You eat it. You eat it in the presence of Yahweh, in the place he set aside. But wait, Moses, some people may say, we're about to go into this promised land. We may not all live real close to this temple. It may be too far to lug everything over there to have this. Not a problem. If the road is too long for you, if you cannot bring your tithe, because the place in which Yahweh chooses to make a home for his name is too far, when Yahweh your God has blessed you, you must turn your tithe into money And with the money clasped in your hand, you must go to the place chosen by Yahweh. There you may spend the money on whatever you like: oxen, sheep, wine, strong drink, anything your heart desires. A little bit of hedonism there, maybe. You are to eat there in the presence of Yahweh your God and rejoice, you and your household. So there's that gratitude part, or appreciation, I like to say, because appreciation, you can appreciate things you may not be grateful for. There's that gratitude part, because if you think about it, these were farmers. Farmers often have a hard time making ends meet. And what this is saying is, no, you can actually put 1 in 10 aside and then have a good time with it. Celebrate, have a party. Picnic with Yahweh is one, as I saw one author describe it. Now we're going to be mentioning the Levites in a minute, and so let me explain who the Levites were. There were these 12 tribes of Israel, and as they're going to go into the Promised Land, they're going to divide up the land among the tribes. Different tribes, the members of the different tribes will be farming different parts of the land. But the tribe of Levi, or Levi, did not have any land. They were scattered among the land of all the other tribes. And so they didn't have any sheep, any goats, any farmland or anything. And so we're going to be talking about them, the Levites. Do not neglect the Levite who lives in your towns, since he has no share or inheritance with you. At the end of every 3 years, you must take all the tithes of your harvests for that year and deposit them at your doors. Then the Levite, since he has no share or inheritance with you, the stranger, and the word stranger here is ger, which really actually means an alien residing in your towns or in your land. The stranger, the orphan, and the widow who live in your towns may come and eat and have all they want. So shall Yahweh your God bless you in all the work that your hands undertake. So there's that other half. There's that service. To show again, you have enough that you can actually share 1/10 of what you have with the people who do not partake of the wealth of the land, the Levites who have no land, the aliens who have no land, the widows and the orphans and so on. And the equivalents today, well, the homeless, the single parent, the person just getting by, the alien living in your land. And the Levites served as temple attendants. They did all the work that the priests didn't do in the temple. So our equivalent today might be Mary Lynn and Skip, our music director, our audio director, our video director, people who do the food for us. These might be our equivalent of the Levites who are to share. Now we move into chapter 15. Chapter 15 will be talking about what's called the sabbatical year, a Sabbath year. Every 7th year, at the end of every 7 years, let me get to that. At the end of every 7 years, you must grant a remission. The nature of the remission is this: every creditor who holds a person or a neighbor in bond, has a loan out to them, must grant him remission. That is, all loans are forgiven at the end of every 7 years. And this is to assure that people don't live perpetually in debt. That at every 7 years, all loans are forgiven. They're just not there anymore. And it says, don't hold a meanness in your heart, like if it's close to that 7th year and someone needs a loan, don't say, well, I'm not going to give them the loan because the loan will be forgiven pretty soon. It says, don't harden your heart for that. Let me find that verse. Do not harden your heart or close your hand against the poor brother of yours, but be open-handed with him and lend him enough for his need. Do not have that mean thought, the 7th year of remission is near, and look coldly on your poor brother and give him nothing. When you give to him, you must give with an open heart. For this Yahweh your God will bless you in all you do, in all your giving. Of course, there will never cease to be poor in the land. I command you, therefore, always be open-handed with your brother and with anyone in your country who is in need and is poor. And really, all of the economic laws in the Bible have that end in mind, to make sure that people aren't living impoverished, and to make sure that wealth isn't accumulated in just a few hands, so that people have all these loans out to other people. No, at the end of 7 years, those are gone. There's the Jubilee year, the 50th year, when all the land that has been sold returns to the original owners. Because a family may be hard up, they may sell their land, but at the end of 50 years, that land returns to the original owners, so that again, things aren't accumulated in just a few hands. There's a commandment when you harvest your fields, not to harvest all the way out to the edges of your field, to leave some for people from the community to come in and do a little harvesting if they're hard up as well. There's even a commandment not to muzzle the oxen that tread the grain, so that as they're treading the grain, they can sort of munch on what they find there. And if that's true of the oxen, imagine, your workers in your fields. Again, let them pick an occasional fig and chew on it if they're hungry. So all of those economic commandments are about that, about making sure that the poor and the people in need have their needs met. Giving God a good time, giving there is the key word. Now, I don't watch the news anymore. I overdosed on news a few years back, and so I don't watch the news anymore. I understand that we are having some presidential debates going on. I only know that from comedy shows. Haven't seen any of them, will not watch any of them. But a number of years ago, back during the 2000 election, I did watch a lot of them. And they didn't start quite as early as they did now, but like November or December of 1999, they were starting the debates then, which seemed very early at the time. And in one of the Republican presidential debates, the moderator asked the question, name a political philosopher who has influenced you. And everybody was waiting for George Bush because he was the front runner. And his answer was Christ, because he changed my heart. And he took some flack for that. The moderator tried to get him to elaborate on that, and he sort of went around in circles, as politicians will. That's not a George Bush thing. That's a politician at a debate thing. One reason I've stopped watching them. But later on, the commentator said, well, it wasn't really an answer, because he didn't say how he changed his heart. He didn't say what his political philosophy was. And something I noticed that I don't think I saw any commentator mention, I may be the only person in America who noticed this, was at that same debate, Gary Bauer was also a candidate, and he referenced the same guy, but he started his answer with, I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. And that's from a little further down in this book. And here's what it says there. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, escorted by all angels, then he will take his seat on the throne of glory, and he's going to separate the people in the right and the left, the sheep and the goats. And then the king will say to those on the right hand, come, you whom my Father has blessed, take your heritage, the kingdom prepared for you since the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, remember, a foreigner, an alien. And you made me welcome. Naked, and you clothed me. Sick, and you visited me. In prison, and you came to see me. And the virtuous will say to him in reply, Lord, when did we do all these things for you? And the king will answer, I tell you solemnly, insofar as you did this to one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it to me. Next, he will say to those on his left hand, go away from me, and a bit more. For I was hungry, and you never gave me food. I was thirsty, and you never gave me anything to drink. I was a stranger, and you never made me welcome. Naked, and you never clothed me. Sick, and in prison, and you never visited me. Then it will be their turn to ask, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, a stranger or naked, sick or in prison, and did not come to your help? Then he will answer, I tell you solemnly, insofar as you neglected to do this to one of the least of these, you neglected to do it to me. And I want to say, what I'm saying here is not about politics. As I say, I don't pay attention to politics anymore. It drove me crazy for too long. This is about recognizing people as people, recognizing their worth and their human value before looking at their market value. To make sure that how can you give God a good time and still think it's all right for people to be suffering and in need. I think most of you have heard of Ralph Waldo Trine, a New Thought teacher and author. Probably his most famous book is In Tune with the Infinite. Yeah. But in 1918, the same year that Ernest Holmes published his first book, Creative Mind, Trine published a book called Higher Powers of Mind and Spirit. And in the last chapter, the last chapter is called The World's Balance Wheel. And he writes this: do you know that incident in connection with a little Scottish girl? She was trudging along, carrying as best she could a boy younger, but it seemed almost as big as she herself, when one remarked to her how heavy he must be for her to carry, when instantly came the reply, "He's not heavy, he's me brother." Simple is the incident, but there isn't a truth so fundamental and so fraught with potency and with power that its wider recognition and projection into all human relations would reconstruct a world. Trine says in that chapter, love is the world's balance wheel. And as the warming and ennobling element of sympathy, care, and consideration radiates from it, increasing one's sense of mutuality, which in turn leads to fellowship, cooperation, brotherhood, a holy and diviner conception and purpose of life is born that makes human life more as it should be, as it must be, as it will be. I love to feel that when one makes glad the heart of any man, woman, child, or animal, he makes glad the heart of God. How do you give God a good time? You give yourself and your family and your friends a good time, and you invite God to the party. And you also invite the widow and the orphan, the homeless and the hungry, the stranger and the alien. You bring the party to those who are sick and in prison, so that a good time is had by all. This is the part where I would normally say, and so it is, but I can't congruently say that at this time. So I will say with Ralph Waldo Trine, and so it should be, and so it must be, and so it will be.